Released in 1987, Final Fantasy for the NES was the first and probably close to most ported remake game in the Final Fantasy series. This game you can get on the NES, MSX2 in Japan, Wonder Swan Color, GBA, and a 2-pack with Final Fantasy 2 known as Final Fantasy 1 and 2 Dawn of Souls. You can get this on mobile phones, I believe in Japan only. PlayStation 1 and a 2-pack with, again, Final Fantasy 2 in the form of Final Fantasy Anthology. You can get it on the Wii and Wii U Virtual Console, the PSP separately, and now in a 2-pack with Final Fantasy 2. Each one of them got their own remakes. You can get this on the PlayStation 3 PSN store, 3DS Shop. You can get this for Windows phones, iOS, and Android devices. Dear God, talk about preserving your history. If you haven't played this game by now, you probably never will. Anyway, when you look at the two games that help build the JRPG genre, Dragon Warrior and Final Fantasy, it's a story of two companies going in different directions. Dragon Warrior was made by Enix and was on the upswing. Square, on the other hand, was on the verge of going out of business. Producer Hironobu Sakaguchi said if Final Fantasy wasn't a hit, then it would be the company's last game and his last game. Kind of like how some players announce that it's their last season, they finally win a big-time professional championship. Anyway, Final Fantasy would become a smash hit for the NES worldwide and set people like Nobuo Uematsu and Hironobu Sakaguchi on a path to legendary status. Dragon Warrior didn't do so well in North America. It would garner cult-like status for being a free game with a subscription to Nintendo Power. However, it helped build a dynasty for Enix in Japan. With the history set up, let's delve into Final Fantasy's basic plot. The plot is the one that made everybody else's plot cliche. You play as four nameless heroes as you journey to rescue the four elemental crystals to save the world. And that's really all that the plot amounts to. To be honest, it's cliche, but it was original for its time. The graphics are pretty good for a 1987 game. Sure, it looks like a game that needs an overhaul if it were to get a remake later on, but still, it's a good looking game. Monsters look great. Every enemy has a lot of detail for a 1987 NES game. From basic enemies like imps and goblins to ogres, and even the bosses look menacing. The world is also massive as well. In comparison, Dragon Warrior has a pretty small world, but you can explore it in the tenth of the time it takes for you to do so in Final Fantasy. It's so big, it's easy for you to go out, explore, and get lost. It's like games like this and Dragon Warrior want to take the open world elements of the PC Ultima games like Ultima 3 Exodus and make their own game off of that. The only real knock I have game's graphics is the animations. I know it's a game from 1987, there were really none in games like Dragon Warrior or the ports Ultima, and it's something you gotta deal with. My problem is that some of them look really mediocre. It seems like they reused attack animations over and over again, and some hits like Impact. Very minor, that's worth mentioning. On the other hand, those look fantastic, and kinda makes up for how mediocre the rest of the animations are. The audio is iconic. The music is so classic that the name Final Fantasy as you think of some of the classic tracks from the game. Some examples are the opening theme, the battle, so forth. Nobuo Uematsu created tracks that are so beloved that they have been regularly remixed for later games. Even a regular potential pick for shows like Video Games Live and when Nobuo Uematsu wants to do those Final Fantasy concerts. There's really nothing I can really knock on it, but I think the sound effects have always worn out its welcome going back to this game, but it doesn't take away from how near perfect the audio design is. I think the gameplay is where the game really shows its age. I think this is one of those games where it had so much pressure for it to be good. It was good for 1987. The problem is that years later it really showed that it needed to be updated. The gameplay was unique for its time. It's a turn-based strategy game like Dragon Warrior, but it has a few different. You go from town to town fighting monsters to level up, buying items and equipment, getting clues on what to do next, and all the cool role-playing game things at the time. The combat system was unique for its time and can be linked to a lot of turn-based strategy games coming from Japan. At the start of each turn, you select an action for each member and a target for each them to attack. The action order is based on how fast each character is and everybody attacks. You can use spells to heal yourself, buff yourself, or do damage or weaken your enemies. Whoever has characters left standing wins. As for your party, it's as follows. At the start of the game, you get a party of 4 nameless characters with selectable classes. The ones you get to choose from are Warrior, Thief, White Mage, Black Mage, Red Mage, and Monk. Each one you can upgrade later on and explains itself. The Warrior is a good brute force character and lacks magic strength. The White Mage has strong white magic power, but do much less weapon damage and lacks the ability to cast higher level black magic spells. black mages are like white mages, but for black magic. The red mage is Square's attempt to make a utility character. Deal and take decent amount of damage, cast decent black magic spells. The problem is that it doesn't really excel at anything. I know there are ways to break the game with him, but I never found them. Monks are a strange class to some extent. They have a fair bit of hit points and can do decent damage with their fists and martial arts weapons, and can cast some medium level white magic spells. The problem is with the monk class is that they can't equip high level armor, so be sure to heal this guy often. The thief is your speedy hit and run guy. He can deal a good amount of damage and is the fastest class in the game, but can't take much damage, so keep him alive. So if you're a new player, I just explain effectively what the manual or some strategy guides would tell, and you're welcome. That long-winded explanation of the gameplay out of the way, here's why seriously it's aged so poorly that, other than for historical purposes, I can never play this game ever again. First and foremost, combat. First problem is that if you target an enemy with a slower character like your black mage and you still try to attack as if it was there, he will waste his attack. This is just start of the frustration new players feel. The next problem with the combat is the way magic spells works. First and foremost, you have to buy them for each of your characters. No problem with that. Where it comes into play is that it uses a counter system casting them much like Dungeons & Dragons. Now, if we were talking 4th or current edition Dungeons & Dragons, it's not that big of a deal. The problem is, around 1987, we were going through probably 2nd edition era. This meant spell counters were few and should only be used in key situations such as boss, so a lot of running back to town to heal. Another problem that was fixed in later versions of the game is the price of death. I know the price of death outside of the Ultimate games for NES is steep, whether it be Dragon Warriors lose half your money and return to first town, or in the case of Sweet Home Japan only and only been translated recently, you lose them for the rest of the game. In the case of Final Fantasy, you need to go back to a town with a church and revive them. Sure, it's at least harsh of these games, but when it does happen, it's game-changing. You lose your healer, you might have to run into 10 to 30 fights before you get them, and by then you're almost out of resources. This is more of a criticism of games at the time rather than the game itself. Probably the biggest issue I have game is that it's an absolute chore to play. Fights are slow, plodding, and much like games like Dragon Warrior, you need to do a lot of fight to get anywhere. Most casual players from finishing it, but for those who do finish the game, it's a very rewarding experience. Overall, you already know what I'm about to say about Final Fantasy. Absolute classic. If you're a fan of the JRPG, Japanese role-playing RPG genre, or even role-playing games in general, and you haven't played it already, then go do so. There are so many ways to play the game, it's stupid to think you have. Sure, it hasn't aged well, but it's a rewarding experience that most, if not all, fans